Are you presenter? Okay, great. Welcome and thank you all for joining us on this last day, last session of RDA. Today we're here and we're excited to talk to you about this concept we have around data concierge. So extending the services, roles, and support of data stewards for the success of international research partnerships. And this concept really grew out of it initiated through some work that Penn State has been doing with Monash University through supporting international collaborations between researchers at our two institutions. So just a little bit of housekeeping and resources. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat or the raise the hand feature. We do have some shared notes happening, and I'll put that link in the chat in just a minute. And then later on today, we're going to do some interactive communication using Jamboards. So look forward to that. So just a quick introduction, or just a quick agenda. We'll do introductions. We have a wonderful group of people to speak with us today. A little bit of background on the data concierge model, lightning talk, and then we're going to have a kind of discussion using, again, the Google Jamboards, and then review responses and consideration of next steps. So presenters and panelists, if everyone wants to just take a moment and introduce themselves. Shamanti, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Cynthia. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Shemonti De. I'm a graduate student at Penn State University pursuing my PhD in higher education. I also work as a data concierge graduate assistant at the Penn State University Libraries. So I'm working on a project with Brianna to kind of understand the bottlenecks of research data management and data sharing. And that brings me here to the RDA. Thank you.
We're very excited to have you working with us. So I'm Cynthia Hudson-Vitale. I'm the head of research informatics and publishing at Penn State University. Kathleen, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Kathleen Shearer. I'm the executive director of CORE, which is the Confederation of Open Access Repositories. And I'm just going to give a lightning talk about a workshop we had looking at data sharing in the context of international research collaboration.
And Patrick is not going to be able to join us, but David, do you want to introduce maybe quickly, like some of the work he's done or who he is, and then yourself?
All right, well, on Patrick's behalf, he sends his apologies, he can't make it today. Patrick is currently the health data librarian at Monash University, where he's been working on a project with one of our medical schools on data management and data management planning, and has also spent a fair amount of time this year running a project for us, interviewing, I think it's 230 researchers now on their data management needs and practices and expectations around the institution, what they would like the institution to help them with, which has been really interesting. We hope to have a report on that soon. And I'm David Groenewegen, the Director of Research at Monash University Library. At some level, Patrick's boss, and interested in been brought into this, I guess, because of the connection between us and Penn State, looking at how we can help our researchers with things. So very interested to hear what people have to think about it.
Excellent. And I don't know if Brianna has joined us yet. I know I got a text message from her that she was connecting. Let's see. Not yet. Okay. So moving right along. David, I hand it off to you to kind of talk about the problem space, and then when you would like me to advance to the next slide, just please let me know. Sure.
Let me just fix my screen a little bit so I can see it, because there's a low resolution screen. So I guess as I said, this, and as Cynthia said, this has been a conversation that's come out of when we started talking. Our two universities have had an agreement a couple of years ago to start doing some targeted projects together. So where the university tried to match up people from Monash, people from Penn State who are doing similar things and trying to build some international collaboration and to fund a bunch of projects to get those sort of things going. And as part of the library, we were invited along to hear about those projects and to see what we could do to support that. And one of the things that really came out of that conversation was that, you know, universities have very complicated research data ecosystems, and there are multiple players in those, and the internal organizations within those are often opaque to researchers. Researchers are confronted with a variety of different names, a variety of different organizational units who all do bits of supporting research data processes. Sometimes they do different things, sometimes they do the same things. Sometimes there are duplication within that system, and it's you know, it's often complicated enough when you're in the back end being part of that, but from a researcher perspective, it's almost a complete mystery. And that then becomes even more complicated when you start working in a multidisciplinary environment where you start working across teams, and particularly when you start working internationally, because now not only do you have to understand how your own organization works and what happens within that organization, but you also have to deal with what's happening between different countries. What are the, you know, how do you move data between borders? And we had the opportunity when I was visiting Penn State as part of Monash's delegation there to talk to a variety of different researchers who are doing projects together. And, you know, some of the resource sharing stuff was just so complicated. There were people who were doing research on water flow in streams. And so they had data that was not just computer data, but actual soil samples and water samples and stuff that you can't necessarily move easily. How do you tie up things like data management policies, which may not be the same at different institutions? What sort of storage tools are people using at the different places? What are the ethical guidelines? And, you know, as part of our own work on this, as part of our working together, you know, we got to explore what it's like to do international ethics, where, you know, it was quite confusing to where, you know, what was happening at Penn State and what the requirements were at their end, and then what I had to do at the Monash end to make sure that it all connected. And, you know, it was, we recognized that, you know, this was just making it harder and taking more time away from doing the research. So what we're sort of thinking about is on how can you provide support mechanisms to help people in this complicated ecosystem? How do you bring that domain, that local domain knowledge and the local processes at your own institution, and then allow that international research collaboration or that team science to work better throughout the cycle? Because otherwise, and you know, people being people will take the path of least resistance. And while that might sort of work for them, it may not be the best way, it may not take the best advantage of what the institution has, and it may cause problems down the track when people don't, particularly in that international space where people haven't anticipated everything they should. Maybe the next slide, please, Cynthia. So we've had this concept of a data concierge, which is this idea which is a bit like the data steward. So it's you know, but we're calling it a concierge to get across the idea of sort of expert just-in-time services. So in the same way that if you go to a good hotel and there's a good concierge there, you can go to the concierge desk and you can say, you know, I want to go to a bar. Now there's a straightforward answer to that question, right? The nearest bar is across the road. They have alcohol, it's a bar. But a good concierge actually asks you the question, well, what sort of bar are you after? Are you after a nice local bar where you can have a beer and a sit down that's going to be friendly? Or are you interested in a piano bar where you can sit quietly and listen to some music, but you don't really want to, you don't want to have to talk to anyone? Are you looking for something a bit upmarket? Are you looking for something that's a bit casual? Are you looking for something where you can go dancing? You know, all those things are bars. And in a data concierge model, there's an idea of trying to engage with what people are trying to do and direct them to not just any answer or all the possible answers, but the best potential answer. So helping to provide that support around, what do you have to do administratively? Where is the place to go in the institution because you have to do X? How do you help people? How do you navigate the resources that are available and the people that are available? Understanding that those various types of people in the system. Who's going to be able to best place to help you, not just here's a bunch of people you know. Helping to support people with particular issues that might come up. Like, we talked about physical samples. How do you move those around? How can you share data in a way that is going to be effective, fit to institution, use the best institutional tools, and not just sort of, go to the default of, well, I know how to work Dropbox and it's cheap, so I'll just stick everything there. And then also, how do we help people to use those tools better? How do we help them with data, visualizing what they're doing and bringing in that ability to point people to the ways of dealing with that sort of stuff. So, we recognize, I think, that this is similar to the data steward sort of work, but we're interested in, what does a model look like that that works across the institution and understands the way that the institution works in an international context. So I think that's it from me. Thank you, Cynthia.
Great.
Oh, Brianna's
Thank you,
taken over
David.
again.
I'm finally connected. And so thank you for that great introduction, Cynthia and David. And so at this point, we're going to move into a lightning talk from Kathleen Shearer. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, who's going to give us an overview of the challenges of data sharing in the context of international research collaborations. And so you should be able to take it over now, Kathleen.
Thanks. You did pronounce my name correctly, so
Great.
Thanks for that. Let me get my slides up. How's that?
Looks great.
Great. Well, thanks for inviting me. And again, this is just going to be a lightning talk, which hopefully will give you some food for thought for the discussion later on in the meeting. And what I'm going to present to you today is kind of the outcomes of a discussion that we had about 18 months ago at a workshop that was funded by the NSF, and it was called the End-to-End project, which stands for International Network to Network. And I was the facilitator of that workshop, and I'd just like to acknowledge the PIs, which Leslie McIntosh and Anthony Jeune were the PIs on that project. So this was a workshop that was convened in April in conjunction with the RDA meeting in Philadelphia. And the aim was to address the social and technical challenges of making data shareable and interoperable internationally. And we had 25 participants, really amazing people from different regions, from different domains, from different sectors. So some were researchers in the government, some were not-for-profit, some were academic. And I think actually one of our participants, Cynthia was a participant, and Marcella, I noticed she's on the call as well, was one of our participants. And again, what our aim was really to try to identify the major challenges associated with data sharing in an international research context, and then try to brainstorm some solutions together. So I like this quote from Peter Pulsifer, who was also one of our participants. He's a research scientist at the University of Colorado. And, he says, he kind of summarizes why we want to do this. The ubiquity of information and communications technology that's emerged in the recent decades provides the human race with unprecedented opportunities for making data shareable and interoperable at a global scale. including between and among nation states, non-state actors, and inclusive of global commons. But the problem is it's super complicated. And, you know, there are just so many challenges, as David alluded to in his talk. So we started our meeting, really, it was a 2-day workshop. We started the first day of the workshop brainstorming, discussing what are the challenges. And I've kind of summarized them here, but I mean, we had about, I don't know, 3 or 4 pages of bullet points that listed all the different challenges related to sharing data in international research context. And just for your information, we addressed both the issue of sharing the data across the research team, because there are challenges there, and then again, sharing the data, you know, after the research project is over or with external to the research team. So we group these challenges into 4 broad categories. One is technology, you know, where will the data sit? Will it be federated? You know, will it be distributed or centralized? If so, how can it be federated? Some partners may have better infrastructure than others, and so all of these issues have to be navigated by the research team. And the second category is standards, and Peter called it. Now I've forgotten what he said. It's a census of standards. There's so many standards out there. Domains, if it's you know, interdomain research, then there will be different domain standards, and that will make it difficult for data to be interoperable. There's different levels of interest in standards, and there's a real need to balance, you know, local kind of use cases with interoperability. And the third area is a very complex one, you know, which I've categorized here as regulations, but it's like having to navigate different laws in different countries, different policies, different ethical requirements, privacy, intellectual property, sometimes institutional policies, and having to navigate all of those issues. And then the third element is the human aspect. So what are the expertise of the research team? There might be different norms and culture around data sharing, different languages, and so on. And so, you know, this was a very in-depth discussion we had, and I've grouped these into four categories, but it's really challenging to address these issues in the context of a research team. And so I'd just like to read a quote from another participant, Lindsay Poirier, who's a professor of science and technology studies at University of California. Addressing the barriers to data sharing is not just about developing more appropriate technologies or providing technical support. To advance international interdisciplinary collaborations, we need to better understand the unique opportunities and challenges that researchers in many diverse contexts face at multiple scales. This will require devising and applying new frameworks for unpacking diverse data cultures and thinking through how the design of data infrastructures and the development of recommended data practices can be interwoven in them. And so for the second day of our workshop, we really talked about what are some of the solutions to try to manage these different challenges, and what kind of frameworks can we try and tease out of these challenges. So we've come up now, and we're in the process now of developing guidance for international collaborations around data sharing. And with that guidance, we hope we will also be able to have a template that we can share with the community to help make these collaborations easier. But just briefly, the guidance is, there's sort of 4 aspects to the guidance. One is at the very initial stages of the project, you really need to build trust and consensus in the team on the need and benefits of data sharing. And it can't be underestimated how important that is, because there are a lot of concerns that researchers have around sharing their data. And then, of course, expertise is required to manage data. So the team will really need to sit down and look at what are the skills requirements and where are their gaps and how can we address those gaps. The third issue is really documenting all of those different policy and legal requirements that may affect the ability to share data. And then the third is to develop a data governance framework. And a data governance framework is kind of like a bit like a data management plan, where it sets out the roles and responsibilities for the team around sharing research data. And that's the end of my short lightning talk.
Wonderful. That was great. And we do already have a question in the chat for you, Kathleen. That's, could you share the whole document that you used at the workshop, or if there was a report? It looks really interesting.
Yeah, so I actually meant to say this. Now, we got a little sidetracked. So at the end of the workshop, we had identified that we were going to write a report, and then we got a little sidetracked with that, but we're getting back on track, and at the moment working on a report which will be made available to the whole community. So we hope to have that report available probably in December.
Great.
So I'll certainly make sure I share it with this group, and I think it will be shared, generally with the RDA community as well.
Perfect. And if there are more questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and these may be questions for Kathleen, or raise your hand if you would like to be unmuted to ask a question. Okay, I'm not seeing anything come in now, but if more do come in, there'll be time during the discussions and as we go along to kind of ask questions of Kathleen or Cynthia or David. Thank you again so much. That was a really great talk.
You're welcome.
Okay, so at this point, we're going to move into our discussion section. And to get this started off, I'm going to ask, and I'm going to put a link in the chat again, that everybody join the Google Jamboard and introduce yourself. And I'm going to show you kind of how to do this if you haven't done it already. And this will be kind of how we interact asynchronously for the beginning of this discussion. So hopefully my share of my screen will work in a minute here. There we go. So this is what the Google Jamboard will look like. And you can use this button here, the sticky note, to create your own sticky note and introduce yourself, including your name, job title, institution or organization, email, and also include what interests you about this topic. And we can give everybody a couple minutes to do this. It's great to see the responses so far. And please reach out if you have any questions at this point with how this functionality works, as we will be using this kind of Jamboard format for the remainder of this discussion section. Starting to see all sorts of new little Post-its pop up, which is great to see. Let's see that people are interested in discussions about data skills required for data concierge, have more perspective on data stewardship, how to support international work from a data repository viewpoint. Curious, interested in what works best to meet researchers' needs. So great responses. We'll give about another minute or so here, and then we'll move on. Curious about how this differs from the data steward or project officer role. How to support researchers in international projects from different disciplines. Okay, great. Yes, keep introducing yourself. And so at this point, for the rest of the discussion, I am happy to pass this off to Shamanti. And I'm going to go to the next slide.
Thank you, Brianna. Okay, so activity and discussion time. So we are going to do this in two parts. First, we're going to use the Google Jamboard, and next we're going to transition to two breakout rooms. So first, we are actually looking to answer this broad question, like what is the idealized common service workflow for international research collaborations? And to kind of get to that, we have two topical areas that we're looking to kind of get responses for. So for people who have either worked in or supported international research collaborations, we are looking to know what has worked as well as what has not worked in that collaboration. So please, again, use the sticky note feature on your left to kind of respond to this. And next, in the next part of this, we are also looking to see what skills sets does a data concierge need to have. So also kind of like getting to know like what are the skills that a data concierge need to have in order to kind of support international collaboration. Also, feel free to use the sticky note feature on your left to kind of respond to this prompt. You have about 5 minutes each for each of the prompts to respond to. Any questions on this?
And you can move between those two boards using this top clicker.
Brianna, please feel free to add if you like if I missed anything.
Nope, that was great. Yeah, so if we want to start, we can start with this. How are people, if they are supporting international research collaborations, what has worked and what has not worked? And also, if you aren't yet involved but have had experience that you think would be relevant for also international research collaborations in terms of what has and what has not worked, please feel free to kind of use the sticky notes and then move them into the boxes for which it's most relevant. And thank you for that great introduction, Shamanti.
Thank you.
So we see that there's been difficulty moving human samples across borders. I'm curious, did that difficulty stem from kind of issues with kind of legal issues that resulted in it not being possible, or was it actually like a difficulty in the actual transportation? So I also see that we now have that what has not worked is difficulty accessing supporting information materials or shared data sources when formats are not open source. And maintaining contact with research groups is hard. How often to contact them? Yes, so a huge component of international research collaborations is this kind of team science and communication issues that result from being kind of in different spaces. But we also see that personal contact has worked in some international research collaborations. And also the moving of samples from institutes with centralized centers for this. So from museums, large scale facilities that have lots of experience. Planning for data management sharing from the start works so that there's structure and norm, and understanding local policies and workflows, and the counterpart at the other institution who also understands local context. This works if you have constant communication. For these ones where they've had the communication that has worked, are there certain platforms that have supported this, certain forms of communication? Gantt charts. This is great. Common data management platform. An institutional repository to make it easier to share data, even in large quantities. Let's see if I can make this a bit bigger, seeing that it's hard to see, hearing it's hard to see the Post-it notes.
Yeah, I see that there's a response that researchers don't always know what their problems are until they hit them. Hard to prepare them for the worst. Yeah. Being unable to help in certain areas, IRB, for example. Yeah, sure.
We're seeing that instant messaging tools can be helpful, such as Slack.
Not being able to find the answer the researcher needs. Bad documentation on sample preparation. Need to know what chemicals are used for transport. Constant communication.
So I think we can stay on this chart for about 1 more minute, and then we'll move to the next question.
A lack of clarity about data sharing plan at the outset.
Yeah. So it's seeming like having a consistent plan and kind of centralized communication or resources can be really useful for making it work. And not having that plan, difficulty communicating, and then also kind of having that distributed service points can make it kind of difficult. Lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities for the research project. Yes, that can be huge.
Addressing data sharing requirements, relevant repositories, and access requirements late in the research life cycle.
Classical communication differences, direct versus indirect communication or feedback. Okay, These are really great responses, and feel free to continue. Time zones. Yes, time zones can make it quite difficult. We have that experience in our own group, being in the United States and Australia can make it quite difficult. So the next one is, what skills do you think a data concierge needs to have?
Good listening skills, yes. For EU, knowledge about GDPR and national legislation on personal data. Persistence. Mm-hmm.
I see good networks to call last minute favors when you are asked for help at the last minute. Yeah, the data concierge definitely needs to have a good network and understanding of their network.
Mm-hmm. I see good networking skills because let me see. Because one person can't know all, the concierge should know who to ask or where to find info. Yes, absolutely. Kind of connecting people with offices and kind of connecting people to people. Yeah.
We have experience in procurement, logistics, and to know about different communication tools, RDM, and appropriate repositories or data could be saved after the project.
Good human resources management, yes.
Also, we have a comment going back to the time zones, is that time zones can be, in the chat, also positive if you can make the 24-hour day across multiple time zones work, if there are clear tasks and handovers. That's true. If you can have good communication and task flow, you can actually utilize more of the time.
Mm-hmm. Knowledge about how to work with networks, time lapses, and patience. So yeah, patience, persistence, those are kind of like common themes that are coming up. Flexible and think on your feet, question the answer you are given. Mm-hmm.
And the +1 to persistence, important for follow through. Yes. I think we can give about another minute, Shamanti, for this question and then move
Sure.
to the breakouts.
Mm-hmm. Great responses. Have knowledge of an interest in the discipline. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right.
Go to the next frame.
Okay, so for this activity, we are going to break out into 2 breakout groups, and each group is going to be responding to the 2 questions or prompts that are here. So we are kind of looking to answer the necessity and components of a standard service model and how to make a data concierge service scalable and sustainable. So, I mean, you can do it whatever way works best for you. You can like have a discussion and then can jot down the notes. So these two are like text boxes where you can just jot down your thoughts and then come back and share. So you have about 20 minutes for this activity. And then we are gonna like come back as a big group and share the responses that the groups have for each of the prompts.
Great. So I will open the 2 breakout rooms and please head into your assigned breakout room. Quickly see there's a message in the chat. Great, thank you. It's looking like we might have lost the other breakout room. There they are coming now. Okay, looks like everybody's coming back into the main room right now. Great. I know we had some great discussion in breakout 2. So I think at this point we can kind of move into kind of summarizing what we discussed in each of our breakout rooms.
Would you like breakout room 1 to go first?
That would be great.
Okay. So the necessity and components of a standard service model, I think everyone was in agreement that there should probably be some standard service components that maybe can be assembled or configured kind of like module blocks to kind of pick and choose from depending upon the local circumstances. So it's more like a portfolio as opposed to specific actions and services. We also had a big discussion that this is not just one person, but perhaps a team. You know, within the library sphere, we do this a lot where whenever somebody comes to us with like a digital project or something, it's not just one person's job to do it. You really have to leverage technological expertise, discipline and domain expertise, scholarly editing. Like, I mean, there's just a whole host of different knowledge that's necessary to make something successful. So it's probably just not one person. What else did we say? There was a comment about ongoing assessment of research data in the project against underlying principles of FAIR. With regards to sustainability, one of the things that was brought up is if we can kind of leverage existing models, such as the data curation network, that allow individuals to actually share expertise across institutions in some way to facilitate the kind of teams that would actually make the international collaboration successful. And then we also talked about kind of the language of the word concierge and what that means. It's really more of like a brokering service as opposed to a necessarily, sometimes as a concierge, like a hotel concierge, you do something and you make it happen, but oftentimes it's making the connections to the people that are actually the most appropriate individual. So with that kind of idea, what we also came up with is this idea of a data concierge kind of yellow pages. And it could be people, it could be infrastructure, it could be services, any of those things to allow somebody to quickly find at a local level or through international collaborations, like what is kind of like the next step. We also talked a lot with regards to sustainability about how there needs to be a commitment by the organization. So you just don't stand up a model and say you're going to do this and then take it away. There really has to be something in place to facilitate its ongoing availability. And then funding, obviously. So if I left anything out, group Breakout 1 members, please feel free to fill in, or if I got anything wrong, I would appreciate it.
That was perfect summary. Thank you, Cynthia.
Great. Well, I can summarize Breakout 2, and it sounds like we actually had fairly similar conversations. So we kind of started with the idea of how does this differ from a reference librarian, and came to the conclusion that it does have kind of that similar role in that there is some kind of reference, but there's also a need for expertise. And so we kind of saw it as somebody who either puts out fires or prevents fires quickly, but then also can kind of direct to further expertise. So that's kind of at least 2 positions. So that kind of first initial connection phase, and then the next level of expertise, kind of similar to a data steward. And we might discuss that there would be need to have expertise in legal and ethics, and that they would need to be able to keep up with those changes over time, as this is something that researchers and institutions are not always aware of the liabilities or up to date on all of their information. And we also talked about how it could be scalable and sustainable if there's some sort of kind of international network of data concierges to make this kind of scale, and that each concierge would have the expertise of their kind of country or institution or location, and then could be reached out to when that collaboration is occurring, to bring together the different kind of localized expertise. Is there anything I missed, others, in Breakout 2?
No, you're quite covered.
Great.
Thank you.
Fabulous. So it does seem like we did kind of come to some similarities in our 2 breakout rooms, which is always kind of great to see, in that there's kind of these different levels of support that are needed from a data concierge. But that kind of first point, I like the idea of kind of is that brokering service. And then also that there's the idea of a need for almost a network of support across different countries, where expertise can be coming from those localized organizations or institutions and countries as well, and with regards to keeping up on those different policies and ethics and laws. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to David for kind of closing remarks and next steps.
Thanks, Brianna. So yeah, look, thanks everyone. It's been a really interesting conversation. I guess there's a couple of things that we're sort of interested in talking about, which are one of the questions that sort of came up was how different is this to data steward roles? Is this sufficiently different that there needs to be a further conversation about it, or is this something that we should be taking to existing data steward groups within RDA and, seeing if it can be incorporated into the discussion? So I know that there's quite a large group talking about, what are data stewards and trying to define that role and so on. And I guess the related question of that are there components of what we've talked about today that could be looked at, that could be brought into those data steward conversations later on? So, it's interesting that we both come up with this idea of the yellow pages of Data Concierge, or that shared thing. And it suddenly clicked. I don't know how many people have seen that movie from a few years ago, The Grand Budapest Hotel, which is about a big hotel in an Eastern European country. And at one point, one of the key characters is a concierge for the hotel. And he's, in some ways, I guess what this idea is, he knows everybody, he knows everything, he enables stuff, he makes people's lives easier. And at some point he ends up in trouble. I won't spoil the whole movie for you, but he calls upon a network of concierges, right? He rings Monsieur something at one of the other hotels, and this connection works out where he is able to find the person who's able to get him out of this particular piece of trouble at one point. And so, if you haven't seen the movie, it's an excellent movie. But that idea of it, not just of it being a local solution that then connects out to a larger way of solving these problems and working together, so that not everybody has to be an expert on everything, I think is an interesting idea. But how do we take that forward? I don't know. So in the last sort of 10 minutes, I am sort of interested in people's feelings of, have we identified something different enough to be worth pursuing, or are we making a tiny tweak to something that already exists? And if people think there is something different enough, how can we make that happen? So I might just throw it open for the last couple of minutes, and if everyone thinks, no, this is just Data Steward with a different name, that's fine. If not, we're happy to have that conversation. And conscious of the fact that it's the end of the last session and you're all tired and want to go home. It's only the beginning of the day for me. I've got the rest of the day to go yet.
So can I just ask, David, so which other groups have you been in touch with about this? Have you talked to the Professionalizing Data Stewardship interest group or any of the others?
I'm actually a member of the Professionalizing Data Steward interest group. And so I have certainly spoken about some of these things within that group, but the bit that I'm in is sort of where that progress is. We haven't sort of touched on this international stuff quite as much. It's been more institutional, so that's, I think, one of the differences. I think Brianna's on that group as well. Is that right, Brianna?
So I did attend the session. I'm in the Engaging Researchers with Data group, which I think is another one that kind of has some similarities in terms of they're kind of talking about how best to engage with researchers around data, but also hasn't brought in yet too much of that international collaboration component. So I agree with David that I think that's kind of where the distinction is, though it does seem like it is kind of an extension of a traditional kind of data steward role. And so potentially, if there's interest in it, this could become some sort of like a working group within maybe that interest group. Maybe there could be further conversations there.
So you could also have a working group that's separate from those. So if you have a piece of work or sort of a work plan that you think you would like to do within 18 months, you could set up a working group and just work closely with these interest groups so that they can feed stuff into you, you can feed stuff into them, and there can be a connection and synergies. So that would certainly work. Some other interest groups have done things where they just have task forces within their own interest group. that sometimes hides what happens a little bit, because what you're doing is pretty much an informal working group in that case. So from my perspective, from an RDA perspective, we actually quite like having working groups, because then it's very clear what's going on. Whereas if you have a working group with 5 task forces, an interest group with 5 task forces, it can be a little bit difficult to actually work out what's happening. And for someone who's looking at new topics, it's a bit hard for them to find out whether this already exists or where to connect. So, but it's really up to you. I mean, if you wanted to set up a working group, you'd probably need to define what you would like to achieve and see if that's something you could achieve within 12 to 18 months. And having a focus on this international aspect seems like a distinct piece of work, if you like, if you would want to pursue that.
Thank you for that great information, Stephanie. That kind of definitely clears things up in terms of kind of potential steps forward. And so I think that, and that I'm glad to hear also that you kind of see that distinction in terms of that international space being kind of the work to be done. And so definitely, I think that seeing that we have about 5 minutes, I definitely think that we can reach out to everybody that attended this session to kind of see afterwards, see if there's interest in working on this as a working group or not. But I think that we also talked about a lot of exciting things here today. So hopefully there's some motivation there.
Yeah, I'm also curious to see, Kathleen had to drop off, but when they put out that report, if there's anything we can kind of work on. So I think just following up with her and making sure that those individuals whose names are on our sticky board can get that, and maybe we can even have like another working, like brainstorming session or something about how to potentially take that forward as a working group.
Cool. Well, in that case, thank you, everyone. Enjoy your evenings if it's your evening. Enjoy your afternoon if it's your afternoon. Enjoy your day if it's your day. Steph, midnight, definitely time to go to bed for people who
Thank you for attending at that time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for hanging on until the middle of the night. And we will send you that information as promised, and we'll have a bit of a huddle and discuss what we might do next, and we'll let you know. But thanks everyone for your participation, and thank you for Brianna for sharing everything, and thank you to everyone who's been involved. You know, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Shrimanti. Thank you, Patrick, who's not here. And we'll hope to see you. And hopefully the next time we have an RDA, we might even be in the same room. Wouldn't that be exciting? Whatever that might be.
Yeah.
You know,
Thank you for organizing.
It looks like we have, Stephanie said that if we have questions about the RDA process or similar, please let her know. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, please feel free to contact me if you want to know anything more about how to set things up or whatever. And David knows how to get hold of me anyway.
Great.
I do.
Thank you.
I do. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, David left, huh? I thought we were gonna